say to somebody that would say, economies of scale, this is powerful, this is an efficient, this is a driving motor of productivity in this world, to have the same factory producing cars and cars and chairs doesn't work out. You need these economies of scale. What would you say?
Even mass production in socialist economies are still of scale. They have enormously large factories mass producing things at will. All I'm saying is that economies of scale due to ephemeralization, to the fact that the means of production, machines like 3D printing, are getting more advanced, smaller and smaller, to the effect where you might in the future have a very large printer that can produce maybe all the clothes that you would need in your home, would produce a lot of the general home goods. The tendency is everything's getting smaller and customizable very easily without the need for mass production. So without the overrun problem of mass production, you could very easily have a society where everything's on demand, everything. Where if you want to produce like mass production, you can. If you want to produce one of something, customize a vehicle for your purposes, the technology is there to facilitate that without the necessity. Doesn't mean that there's less made, doesn't mean demand isn't being met. It just means there isn't the necessity for these huge fixed automation machines to run the same processes over and over again. Does that make sense? Thank you.
As I have many questions, I'll just state one of them. I'm an engineer, and as an engineer, I know that in order to have a stable system, you need to have a negative feedback, something which counteracts and stabilizes the system. So this negative feedback would reinforce social behavior and then would punish somehow antisocial behavior. What is the negative feedback of the system you propose?
Well, if we're talking about material production, the negative feedback is, well, I would say the negative issues that are possible or conducive to any given production are immediately addressed in that equation I called the design efficiency equation, which means that you have a rule set, which the entire point of this rule set is to bypass as many possible foreshadowable problems you will ever have. Now, on a larger level, I'll also point out that the global resource management idea, where you have these things that are monitoring scarcity, for example, it's all in real time. So it's both positive and negative feedback, if you will, generally speaking. So the point is to anticipate. It's, as Buckminster Fuller would say, it's anticipatory design. And I think all of that stuff is equated. And clearly, you're monitoring the possible negative effects of everything, to be more specific. That just goes with the nature of any kind of a sustainable approach. And it would be built right into the program. And again, initially started right in that initial design efficiency algorithm that I spoke of, which makes sure at the very front, at the very beginning, that nothing is done that isn't meeting sustainability standards. So the punishment, if you will, is the fact that if you submit something that isn't sustainable and you don't conform to the system, you can't do it. It's not going to let you do it because it doesn't meet protocols of sustainability or efficiency. I hope that answered your question.
TZM Belgium asked, do you envision a sort of structure within TZM to review TZM defined and give constructive feedback in a structured manner, in this way improving, evolving TZM defined?
As far as the textbook, sure. There has to be some starting point. There will be numerous editions of this text. We need something in motion now. This movement has been without a firm text for a couple of years now, and it's taken a long time to put it together. The movement has been compiled and amalgamated and filtered through the core TZM lecture team, if you will, which is a very small group at this point, which I hope will get larger. Having an open source communicative platform for this type of material, it's very helpful, but it can also create enormous time length of actual finishing. So let's get this out first. And then all that stuff will be reviewable. A wiki could be set up to post and review, and people can give feedback. I'd love to see that. But something has to be set in motion to set the standard first. So let's get this out first, and then there will be larger order review. And that's the whole point. I mean, everything that's in this text is based on feedback that's been happening throughout the years. It's not just novel stuff that's been put together without feedback.
All right. I have a question not exactly related to the lecture, but I would like you to give your opinion on the differences and similarities between the Zeitgeist Movement and anarchism as a movement, as an ideology?
You mean, well, there's a number of different schools of anarchism. You mean communist anarchist? You mean capitalist anarchist? You mean anarchist anarchist?
The anarchist, let's say.
I have no idea what the anarchist actually is. I'm saying, I want to know what you're saying, though. Please describe to me what you're talking about, so I know.
How many of these core, let's say, ideologies of anarchism, which are connected with basically I don't know how to explain it right now because it would take too much time. Basically, anarchism is in this core meaning of rule, no rule, and the society without any form of oppression or rule or
Sure.
Hierarchical structure.
I can relate to that. I think in the context of a capitalist anarchist, which I'm familiar with, they look at any act of what they call coercion, so anybody imposing their will on somebody else, as morally unjustifiable, and they present lots of arguments for that. I think all of those things that are trying to stop oppression of society are all well and good, but if you look at the framework of the synergy of our relationship to each other on this planet, in the environment that we're in, the pressures that are created, you cannot reduce coercion to just behavioral action. It's actually a process. You know, when someone mugs you on the street and takes your money, that's an act of coercion, obviously. But yet, you don't know what happened to that person in their life to deprive them to such a degree where they are forced to do that. That might not have been what they wanted to do at all. There was a story that happened in New York. A mugger went in and was right down the street from me, and he stole some food, actually just robbed the cashier. And then a year later, he went back and paid the cashier back and apologized and explained why he did what he had to do because of pressures in his family. So a lot of that stuff flies out the window with me when you think about non-coercion as a universal principle, because it only thinks about behavioral or policy stuff, you know, taxation or tariffs, if you want to talk about economic coercion. I think it all falls flat. If you have, I would say this proportion is what is caused by the coercive negativity caused by human behavior alone, if you will, if there's even such a thing, and this is the coercion that's is a consequence of our inefficient system. And not to mention, as a final point, nature is inherently coercive. We can't just do anything we want. I can't run up this wall and run on the ceiling. I just can't do that. So there are laws that restrict our behavior, hence the sustainability and efficiency laws. So rather than think about people imposing upon you, which I think is where anarchism kind of is rooted, let's remember that their behavior is a consequence of influence, and also remember that we have to be sustainable and efficient. Therefore, we have to follow some set of rules. Thank you. Thank you.
Is this working? Okay. Okay. In a system based on access, it would be possible that someone takes very much more than he needs. So do you think there would be the necessity to define a maximum of that someone takes, or how could that be possible?
I think in the case of severe, there's no incentive to do it, first of all, which I point out, because that's a common question. Why would someone go into a facility and take 40 televisions? What are they going to do? They can't resell them. Maybe they have an art piece. And that can be provided for in a certain sense. I think the equation would be if everyone was to take the same amount, would it work out? And there would be some type of buffer. And it would say, you know, this processing you can take X amount, but if you took more, it would mean that everyone else would have to take, if everyone else took the same amount, then it would be an overrun. So it's a sustainability equation, a sustainability of balance based on population. Does that make sense? A very crude equation that says if not everyone can have the same number of what you're having, then you're an overrun and you're out of sustainable line. Now, I think that would be a limited problem because there's no reason to hoard things. And I think the only example would be, you know, very extreme examples where someone needs something for a very abstract concept. And there could be other processes of engagement when it comes to industry as far as how that could be obtained. If someone wanted to get that many, they wouldn't go to a library to do it. They would order it in advance and go through the sustainability protocols put forward through the process that I talked about. It would be a separate layer of engagement. It wouldn't just be taking a bunch of stuff from one facility. So I don't know why the reward would be for that. I mean, excuse me, I don't think the incentive would exist for that. And again, you could create alerts, if you will, in the event someone did that. And again, the whole foundation here when it comes to this idea of luxury, this idea of what it means to be in line with sustainability isn't just a natural equation, it's a resource distribution equation for the whole world. If a given resource that's very dire comes into play, we can either fight for it, just like we do today, or we can understand it. And that means that others would have to have less of that resource. That way we maintain social stability. If you have an educational system that's aware of that, say, well, you know, we're running out of this, we don't have substitutions, we have to do something very different in process. Then everyone would understand, if they're educated, to understand that if they, that they didn't do that, social instability would arise. It's a hard point to make because people aren't used to thinking that way because we're so individualistic. But I think about my actions in terms of how it affects everything. And if we have an educational system that thinks the same way, I don't think those problems would arise. And I think there'd be an easy way to circumvent rare issues of that consideration. Does that make sense? I'm glad you brought that up, though, because I've thought about that, and I was actually going to include that very point in the presentation based on what I said in a much more organized way than what I'm saying right now, because it is a good point. It's a very good point. Yep.
All right. We have a question from the internet. Louis from Finland is asking, how does the system proposed deal with psychopaths and other mentally ill people, or people who do not plan to play nice, so to speak, whatever the reason for the behavior?
Sure. Mental illness, of course, exists, and there are people that very much do not have control of their actions. And if you study mental illness, it's an issue of public health. It's not a behavioral issue. So in the future, you know, there's often talk, people say, well, there's no police, there's no this and that. There's clearly going to be some type of subculture that deals with problems like this for the sake of stability in a society. Just like if somebody in a very small town goes completely mad, the entire public is going to do what they can to make sure they don't cause much damage or hurt anybody. So do you need a force to take care of that? Maybe. But they would be a health force. They would be a public health type of institution that sees the damage done and they contain the person and they figure out what's happening. And if it's the worst case scenario and they're unredeemable, they're literally, their brain is degraded to that degree where they're a danger to themselves and others, then you have to have containment. You don't punish them. You don't do the prison system thing where you're literally just mean to people. You just take them aside and you do what you can. You learn about it too. You learn about the causality because almost all mental illness, there are genetic predispositions, but even schizophrenia has a 50%. Pretty much if you have a schizophrenic gene, there's a 50% chance you're going to get it. What causes it to go over the edge? Stress. So if you have a highly stressful society, and that's the cause of most mental illness today anyway, overburden of stress and mental angst and pressures that emerge unnecessarily, usually due to scarcity and familial relations in the midst of scarcity and all the things that the market system creates. So that's your focus of prevention. And then again, if you have to contain somebody, well, that's just like containing somebody that has a really bad flu, you know, that could kill other people if they can't get it under control. Hey.
Hey, Peter. Nice post-scarcity exercise, by the way.
Thanks.
It was really good.
I appreciate that.
I wanted to talk more about that in my question.
Okay.
And like, yeah, we have so many solutions as far as like doing more with less, like biointensive gardening, permaculture, earthships, super adobe domes. I don't know if you've heard about those. It looks just like 3D printing, but with human labor.
Right.
And so like, yeah, when we have this technical equilibrium for human consumption, then we have this global standard, if you will, for all people that we can't pass. If we do pass this standard, then we're forcing this equilibrium out of balance and potentially disrupting or exploiting the planet's resources in a way, right? Is understanding this standard of living the goal of the natural law resource-based economy? If so, how can we begin to calculate this with all the negative feedback and stuff, and to make it clear to those who are living above this technical standard in our current system that they are empirically harming the planet? I would also be interested if these highly technological solutions would fall, like vertical farming, would fall above or below this standard. It's also interesting to me in the resource-based economy. That's my question.
Those are great questions. I think you had more or less two questions there. I think the very fact that statistically we are in life support decline, the sad thing is the very fact that we have this should be the big red flag. The problem is that no one really understands why, as I try to describe with respect to a consumption-based economy. So if you have that education, if you're rational, if you're actually thinking about stuff that's happening, I don't mean to sound condescending if you're rational, but we're not really rational because we relegate our decision-making processes to our self-interest, and we think that that's what everybody else is doing. So why would we be global conscious? Why would we be socially conscious? It doesn't get reinforced at all. Anyone that's functioning in consumption overshoot, like the multi-billionaires, they eventually through time should realize the sickness of what they're doing. It's not only harm to the planet, it's social harm. It's a sort of social violence, as that example I expressed. To how far do you go with what you think you deserve? 20 mansions, 30 mansions? And of course, the ridiculous example of having Africa as your backyard. Clearly, that's crazy, and they don't think of that way gradually because it's so reinforced by materialism. So to answer that question, it's an issue of education. And of course, showing what's happening, which is the education. So anyone I speak with of immense wealth, and they have billions of dollars, the first question is, don't they feel any moral obligation given the suffering that's happening in the world? When they hoard all that money, don't they feel anything? Where they're hoarding labor, they're hoarding energy, they're hoarding food. So I think the empathic problem, it's an empathic problem. This culture has had empathy pretty much stripped out of them. We don't identify. We think that we're in our position because of our sweat and our labor, even though, frankly, the vast majority of people that are rich are just lucky, is the truth of the matter. So, and people that are really, really poor are just really unlucky because they're usually born into conditions that reinforce that. So the system of maintaining this equilibrium starts with education, and then it moves into a calculated program like I described before. So I hope I'm answering your question. If you want to live in a sustainable society, this is the reasoning. If you don't, well, then we continue doing what we're doing. There's a value system disorder out there that's going to be very hard to overcome. But I think as the system continues to degrade and as social uprisings come forward and as the movement moves forward to speak about this, I think the value shift will slowly take hold because it's going to have to. The sustainability of our species basically depends on it in many ways. Thanks.
So I got to hear that by 2050 we're going to have like around 9 billion people living in the world, and knowing that there is already a lot of people who doesn't have a job actually, that doesn't collaborate for their society whatsoever, and in this efficient kind of system will be like less and less people needed in order to make the whole machinery work. There's going to be a lot of people without doing anything, but you still need a lot of people who run the machinery by maintenance and
of course,
and all kind of stuff. So who decides, or what decides, or how can you involve people to make them, or who's going to work, who's not going to work?
Yeah, great question. I had a whole other section to this talk that I eliminated because it was so long, and it was called the domestic economy. The domestic economy is a term used to describe, what people do at home, what people do in their communities. The fact that people volunteer. In America, even in America, it's amazing. Half of the population volunteers quite often and in quite a large degree. I can't remember how many hours it was, but I believe it was I think it was a number of like 20 billion hours a year was volunteered by people that have normal jobs that just do other things. There's tons of pro bono work happening in the legal system, happening in the medical system. There's an enormous percentage of the population globally, you'll find, that does a lot of stuff for free. Why? Because they enjoy it. They like helping people. And I think when you have a society like this where the maintenance of these machines and factories and the system itself is reduced down to, say, 5% necessary, people will not only be available to do it, they'll want to do it. And they'll want to contribute even more. I think even if you had a maintenance of 5%, you'd still have 40% wanting to contribute because they would enjoy it. They would enjoy the idea of creation and improving efficiency. They would also do other engineering feats and tasks that would apply to this system through research. And that's really where this system heads. Everyone turns into a thinker. No one's laboring anymore. Everyone's thinking and applying and developing. And I think that's a natural human drive. There's a book called Drive, no pun intended, by a guy named Dan Pink. And he did a whole series of studies that found that people in arduous labor roles, they needed money because it was arduous and no fun. but thinking and creativity and development, it was a passion. And money actually interfered. When money was involved in the element of creation and development, it actually interfered. It lowered their efficiency and productivity. So that's a big statement towards how you can create a society that reduces all the things that we just don't like or is unhealthy and unsafe, unnecessary, I should say. I mean, 80%, I would say 80% loosely, of all the occupations in existence are not actually doing anything. They just keep money circulating. They don't have to be there. So with all that put together, I think you'd have plenty of people that would move forward. And my joke answer when someone asks me that, usually that question comes with a more cynical tone. And they say, well, who's gonna run the machines? I go, I do. And that usually shuts them up. Because do we have to do everything for money? Do we not realize that the whole world is our home? Why can't we think about our entire city in the same way we think about our home? We take care of our home. People take care of their local environment. They don't want it to be filthy and overrun with vermin and everything else. So why not have that exact same concept applied to your city? Why not have that exact same concept of caring and necessity applied to the whole world? It's not that far-fetched. And unfortunately, this system reinforces the exact opposite because of its individualism and propensity for separation. So, thank you.
Is it working? Okay, cool. Hey, Peter.
Hey.
I'm just going to stand up because otherwise I can't see you. My question is sort of more about, it's less about the specifics of like a technical thing and more a question of how do you see the transition, I mean, on a more practical level? Because, I mean, to do all of these things, it seems like we need a global approach where everyone is sort of working together, all the nations, all the people. How do you see that practical transition?
That's a very difficult question. I mean, how do you have a practical transition in a society that's working against pretty much everything by its current structure that you're trying to attain? I think that there are a number of sort of protest-type environments. There are a number of things that can alleviate current stress, which can evolve into this system. For example, I don't know if Germany has any time banks. They're quite prolific now in small communities. Time banks are really brilliant because not only are they appropriate because you're not using money, which is a very unique thing. If you have a lot of poverty in the world, if you have a lot of which there's a tremendous amount, but people have skills, then if you start to barter through exchange for, exchanging labor for labor through these mechanisms, you're getting things done in an environment, if you're broke with no job, you otherwise wouldn't be able to. So imagine for a moment, if all the unemployed of the world right now, which there's no shortage of, joined a time bank, all their skill sets came together, completely absent of the market economy. There's no money involved. They're just bartering labor. And it got so efficient that people could do this a lot, and it was really efficient, and it became almost more efficient than money, where people that were in service with money, they decided to move to the time banks. That's an amazing step. It would have happened like that? I'm not quite sure, but it could. I mean, if we made an efficient time bank system, you'd be amazed at how fast it could conform, and people might prefer it to the market, especially if these people were interested in changing the system as we are. There are other issues that are happening right now that could also help, I should say, if you were to do a step-by-step process. I'm not even going to go into that, actually. You can look at it two ways. Either society accepts the path, and they go, boom, we're going to go step by step. We are going to start to create automated systems for food. We're going to supply X percentage of food for this city and get it out of the way with no money directly. And you start to go step by step. You can call it socialization. I wouldn't use that term because it's historically wrong in the context I'm making. But you just keep removing the interest in having money. If you did that, you would eventually be able to evolve in a step-by-step way. But that would take the sanction of the entire community, and that's a very difficult thing. That's pretty much all I can say. I could give you all sorts of ideas that can help educational processes, how you could create protest environments to draw awareness where you just stop spending money. It's a very difficult subject. Transition through technical means, through showing people what the world can be and programs to make it happen, to develop mass interest in this type of movement towards efficiency, also illuminating how inefficient we are right now is the step, which is why I'm here right now. Why GRI, the Global Redesign Institute, is a great concept, why I'd love to see programmers start on this type of calculation process to show an interface. If you can show the world what's possible, eventually they'll take hold, especially given the pressures that are here right now. So again, there's going to be a whole chapter in this text that I showed about transition in different scenarios, but I don't want to waste too much time because I'm just going to keep rambling on different ideas because it's not easy to think about. But again, if people want it, it will happen.
Yes. Hi there. So when I ask myself why other centralistic economic systems failed against capitalism, I think the answer lays for the most part in the lack of quick adaptability and micromanagement. Also, motivational aspects were better thought out in the capitalistic system. So regarding the new resource-based economic model, how could we address those flaws I stated before, namely the lack of quick adaptability and micromanagement?
So you said critical adaptability and micromanagement?
The lack of quick adaptability and micromanagement.
Quick, you said quick. I'm sorry. Okay, quick adaptability and micromanagement, and then you said something about incentive. Quick adaptability and micromanagement. Well, the system that I've just described is one of the most rapid feedback systems you could ever come to terms with, especially if you have a sensor system that's keeping the entire edifice informed of what's happening through production. That could be regional, such as in a country, if you want to use landmass distinctions like that, or it could be global. And in fact, the global resource management process is very simple. It's just simply looking at the Earth as one big inventory system with sensors so we know the rates of everything that we need that's relevant for any given purpose. With that type of measurement system, you could adapt amazingly fast to any given problem. It's much faster than humans could, much faster than price ever could. I mean, price is ridiculously slow. It might work, but you have to have inventory, you have to buy something from a store, it has to reduce to a certain amount. That feedback is sent back to the supply house. It takes a long time. This could be instantaneous. You also avoid shortages and overruns and lots of other problems, as I mentioned before. I mean, look at economic data. When you get economic data that the government or financial institutions post, it's like half a year old. It's really old data. None of this stuff is actually in real time or even close to it. So this would move much more rapidly if it's properly programmed. As far as incentive, which I believe you mentioned, that is, I think it's a fallacy. I think the incentive fallacy, the idea of progress through money and the pressure and the coercion, the natural coercion of society to get people to just do stuff, I think that's more wasteful than it is viable. What is progress? Is progress just inventing one more gadget after another? I mean, that's pretty much what we're doing at this stage. I mean, there might be certain help. It might ease our lives a little bit. I would argue in a lot of ways it's made our lives more complicated, more stressful. I was the last to move into social networking or Twitter or I was the last to, I'm not a Luddite, I was the last to even get a cell phone because I was like, wow, this thing's gonna just, if it's mass appeal and this direct communication, it's gonna distract the hell out of me. You know what I mean? And as it probably does. I mean, attention deficit's off the chart these days. I wonder why. We're completely overburdened with information now, which I don't know if that's good or bad. It's a hard thing to say. But what is progress? Progress means you're creating things that ease your lives, and find stability and maintains a low stress and obviously creates happiness, not some impulsive need to keep moving and doing things. Now, that aside, I think once these kind of efficiency notions come forward, I think there's a great drive in almost every human being to want to create and to have an effect. Now, I say have an effect. I mean, if you want to create something for self or sale, that gives you sustenance, that's great. But if you talk to any elderly person and you ask them what they really appreciate in their lives, they'll always tell you, at least 9 out of 10 times, it was what they did for other people. We have an intrinsically social nature, and I think that this needs to be amplified rather than suppressed. And I think incentive, if we can realize that what we're doing is helping others, not just myself, I think that incentive alone really will drive people. As it already does today, because we have millions and millions of people that volunteer all the time, pro bono work. Why? Because they want to help. There's a deep urge to help. It's a part of our social nature.
You already mentioned a word, education. I think that's a very important word, which I don't see addressed a lot and within the concept of the Zeitgeist movement. Do you have any clearer ideas on this? Because obviously, if we go through 13 years plus schooling, that degrades our brains to functioning rather than creative thinking and even understanding concepts like this, I think it will be a big problem to even get ahead pragmatically.
I agree. Obviously, the whole movement's based on education, but you're referring to institutional education. Yeah, no one in the movement has control over how education is sanctioned in our heavily regulated educational institutions. One of our main lecture members, James Phillips, he works with children right now in educational circles. I think he's had affiliations with some institutions to talk about ideas like this. So there's people that are trying to do their best with that. But I agree with you. Education in the future won't have anything to do with this post-World War II factory assembly ethic that we have that runs throughout. How we influence that comes down to how much information we spread. I get lots of emails from teachers and college universities. They show my films. Engineering students, philosophy is a big one. They love showing the films. So I mean, it's up to the teacher, I guess, in a lot of ways if they can control their curriculum. But other than that, it's just a process of getting as much out there as we can and hoping that it takes hold. Luckily, I will say that sustainability has become very popular. So there are huge sustainability educational facilities out there now. They talk about sustainable design, and that's a great first step. That wasn't there 30 years ago. So that's a really big, it's almost trendy. The idea of green is now very trendy, for better or for worse, because now marketing loves to talk about it, but yet they're not generally doing anything that's actually sustainable. They just make people think they are and charge a lot more when they do, because everything that's sustainable and green is much more expensive than everything that's normal. Only the rich can be sustainable, apparently. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a million questions, but I will try to break down to two. Sorry, I think there is some echo. So first thing, I really enjoyed the part about the energy program and how you show through calculations. I mean, there are many people also sustaining the same theory, professors from the university, people working in the field directly. And basically with each of these energy source, you can provide sustainability. And you don't need to go on with the system we are relying on in this moment.
Absolutely not.
I am a dreamer as much as you are in this sense, but I don't want to remain a dreamer as much as you don't. So the question is, how do you see this realized? Like, who is going to do this? So the thing is, there are people trying to solve the third world debt, for example. There are the theory from Stiglitz, and this is not really far structurally for what you propose. And they are trying to go through the institutions. So they are not trying to change the structure of capitalism. They are trying to use it in a good way. What do you answer about that, relating to the energy program, but also like to the food program or to other aspects that you touched?
Well, the second question, with people that are using institutional means to try and solve their problems, I mean, obviously, the answer is that, well, people just do what they have to do to the highest degree they can within the system. But at some point, it's going to be found that going to the International Monetary Fund when your country is bankrupt to take loans at interest while they manipulate your resources and infrastructure for their corporate constituency, it's not going to be very, very appeasing for most countries, which is why a lot of countries have rebelled. So the whole thing is a scam on that level for debt, but that's another conversation. There are tons of NGOs out there. There are tons of, in fact, if you look at the rate of increase of non-governmental organizations or non-profits related to human rights and sustainability, it's almost exponential in the 20th and 21st century. If that isn't an indicator of something, I don't know what is. It's ridiculous how many of these institutions are there, and they're trying to help. But my big thesis, as I stated at the beginning, is that it's only going to go so far. There's a glass ceiling. So obviously, they have to do something else. And it's, again, I hate to be redundant, but it's an awareness issue. I would love to see a country, and I had this conversation earlier. I'm going to make a point, and I'll answer your first question. This, I think, might help a little bit as far as change. And this is the way I think transition, in fact, could happen. I'm surprised I didn't think of it just a moment ago. Excuse me, I'm a bit tired. I think at some point on the planet, because of ephemeralization, because of doing more and more with less and less, some country that has increasingly having less need to engage in globalization, meaning they have so many resources in their country, coupled with the efficiency that they've been able to create through ephemeralization, that they will realize that they do no longer have to be involved in the global economy, and they'll no longer have to be subject to the things that the global economy does and the mass global market system. And they will realize the negativities, and somebody will come along, and believe me, it will be as propagandized as possible when someone does this. Look at any nation that's tried to be independent. So it's not an easy thing to do. But they will probably do it eventually because they will contain and they'll close themselves off and they will be sustainable using these methods without any external interference. That would be an amazing step. Imagine if a South American country blocked themselves off, I don't say block, but decided to engage no commerce ever. They don't need it. They're off the grid from the world economy. And they set the standard because they move into a sustainable economy. They move into exactly what the world should do based on these principles. That would be an amazing first step. And I think that's highly probable. I think that some countries are going to get that idea and they're going to do it and they're going to get it done because the technological means are pointing to that direction. You no longer need to rely on this vast interdependence. I'm not saying that countries should do that in the sense that we should be all to be detached. Not at all. We need global consciousness. We need global connection. But that might be a good first step to show that you don't have to be reliant on these international institutions anymore, which are inherently corrupt. As far as your first question about energy, there are plenty of people out there that are engaging with high diligence in the science community for energy. The problem with what's happened in the investment community is, see if I can explain this. Everything that happens in its creation of, say, renewable energy, it's like solar energy. We've had solar power cells for a long, long time, and yet they've only inched into efficiency, inch. And they've been ridiculously expensive because of various investment pressures, various production limitations. No one said, okay, let's just apply the science right now to the highest degree possible and do it. No one said that because they can't. It's not profitable. They have to make it profitable to begin with across the entire stage of development. So why is it that only 80% possible efficiency now with solar radiation capture, capturing the entire spectrum of light now, even infrared? And we only have 18% in commercial solar panels sold now, on average. Why is that? Is it because they can't do anything more than 80%? No, it's because they can't make the profit leap. They can't do it. So imagine, for example, the atomic bomb, which of course is a horrible thing. But what did they do when they made this? They got 100,000 scientists, put them in one big facility, and maybe not 100, there's other people, there's like 50,000 scientists, I can't remember the number. Anyway, there's a large number of people that they put together in this facility to push this thing forward. There was no market system. There was nothing to influence them. They produced that thing rapidly. If you had to bring the atomic bomb to market, it would have taken decades and decades and decades and decades. You had little atomic bombs, and then so energy is the same. It has the same problem. It's going through this investment nonsense, and it's going through the profit filter. And I don't have a solution other than let's get rid of the profit system and get this mechanism going. I can't tell you how it can happen otherwise, so I hope that helps, but it can be done. The potential's there, and we just need to bypass investment and just do it. Maybe some massive grant from a very rich institution. Maybe some college could, I would love to see a university think tank. This is something you don't see much today. Every single university with all their resources, because kids have the one luxury in this economy, they don't have to work. They're there to learn, right? They're paying a bunch of money to learn, but they're there to learn, at least in most cases. Maybe not in Europe, you don't pay as much as we do in the States, which is ridiculous. And you get them all to work on the same project. Entire international university collaboration towards the advancement of geothermal technology to its highest efficiency. If you did that, that would be unbelievable. I don't know of many many grants or projects that are like that right now, but I think that would also be an amazing step. Because once you show the public, once again, what's possible and what's not happening, they're going to say, why can't we have this? Why can't we have this? And the market's going to scratch its head and have to figure out how to do a runaround and maybe bring it to fruition faster than usual. So I hope that explains. Hope that helps. Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for your work and your inspiration. And my question: you talked a lot of calculation and technology, but I'm rather interested in psychology. So yeah, regarding different worldviews, different value systems, if you want to. It's hard to convince people just by argument. Sometimes I think you're familiar with this problem.
Sure.
And so, how is this? Are there different worldviews? How can we include them into this new economic model?
So you mean people that are more influenced by emotional or psychological appeals? How do we assist them to understand this, if I understand your question? Is that right?
Now, regarding that, we had a question about what was it? Considering there are people who believe belief in God or something. Okay. Yes, and so I would consider that those people, to make it simple, to put it in a simple way, those people have a different kind of understanding than maybe people are sitting in this room. So
it's tough. I would look at that the same way I look at people that are very dedicated to market enthusiasm, that believe in the market, that think market is a system of natural liberty and all the classical economic stuff that we continue to read about. So religious thought. So what you're referring to are thought processes that are antagonistic towards the model. They have some type of moral assumption, and they think that this model interferes and is amoral in some way. I think that's what you're saying.
Yes, for instance.
That's hard because you have to take it on a per case basis. If you speak with people that are deeply religiously minded, that have a very direct assumption that causality comes from a higher order, that's a hard thing to deal with when you talk about sustainability and efficiency protocols and the laws of nature. You know, it's very clearly. But you can try it other fields. Most religions have moral orders, or actually most market systems have moral orders too. So just like thou shalt not kill. Okay, then if you want a system where people don't kill each other, let's make resources a little bit more available to everybody so they don't have the pressure to do so. If you argue it like that with someone with their moral principles, you might be able to get them on your side. Or if I talk to a market economist that really believes in laissez-faire economics, and they think everything should be free and get rid of the state, you agree with them and say, well, yeah, you know, it'd be great to see the power of that state gone, but how do we do it? And you take them through the train of thought that the fact that the state is in absolute aura bora, is absolute in continuum with the market as a regulatory entity. It has to exist. If they don't understand that, that's another problem, because I run into a lot of people that don't understand any of that. They just block it out, which is another problem. That's called mind lock. And all I can say to those that encounter mind lock is move on. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. Don't torture yourselves by addressing the most stubborn minds. So it's an issue of relating to values. If you can find common ground with the people you're speaking with, then you go that route. So hope that helps. Thank you.
I'd like you to elaborate more on the stability issue, because I don't think you addressed all of the aspects which I meant. Personally, I think that the stability issue is much more important than all the technical feasibility problems, because technically there's no doubt that it can be achieved, but the stability is which bothers me. Let me give an example. I don't think that most waste is due to bad intentions, but due to negligence. For example, if I design some system and I design it in an incorrect way, and I make a mistake which then breaks some very, let me not say expensive equipment, because there won't be any money, but equipment which has a lot of resources in it, and my mistake could possibly negate all my work contribution, all my life contribution which I did. So what would be the mechanism that would enforce discipline and punish negligence? Because it's not necessarily that people will just be very greedy and try to have possessions, but they will be negligent in the process of creating.
Okay, well that gets to the heart of, again, this program that I described when it comes to design efficiency. So if you want to refer to the process of good creation and assure that that creation meets integrity, there are two filters. One filter are these algorithmically programmed sustainability protocols and efficiency protocols, which are very tangible and can be represented in quantifiable terms, and anything proposed can run through this type of filtration. And the second is other human input in many ways, which is why I talked about that system as being an open source system. So if people are active in this process of engineering and sharing information, and someone submits something that the AI algorithm happens to miss, Others reviewing these concepts, well, might just find it because they happen to be familiar with that particular inefficiency or problem, or as you say, negligence. I mean, negligence, I think, might not be the right word in this context. I don't know why anyone would even engage in this system if they intended to be negligent. It's not like the market system where you can be negligent because you're always trying to get money, so you can make stuff that doesn't really work, or never think it through. You just get it to market as fast as possible, just like the first of anything that's made usually breaks down, has all sorts of problems. That would consider that to be negligence, but I don't know why anyone would be negligent in this system. Why would you waste your time to be negligent, meaning be literally inefficient on purpose, to be lazy? So I hope that still answers your question. If not, please elaborate more so. And you also talked a moment about a negligent system causing other problems. I consider the entire apparatus of the market as one negligent system, if you want to use that type of definition, producing lots of other artifacts that affect us negatively. But that might be an abstraction. I wasn't quite sure if that's what you meant in your opening point. Okay. I hope that helps, because that's what the whole point of this system is to avoid negligence, if you want to use that term arbitrarily, to avoid anything that has a negative consequence. That's the whole point of this entire process. Apart from making it an absolutely participatory economic system where there's no dictatorship, there's no people sitting behind the curtain deciding what to do. It is set in motion through automation, through the basic laws of nature and general social consensus.
All right, we have 3 questions left right here.
Okay.
All right.
Hi. Do you see any flaws in the system, in the resource-based economy that the Zeitgeist Movement advocates for? And if not, if it's too early to foresee some flaws in a system, what do you think are the main challenges? Are there any threats that could terminate spreading the word further? If you know what I mean.
Okay. Well, the second question, clearly no large power structure has dealt kindly with any mass of people moving towards change that would alter that power establishment. So one of the beauties of the movement is that it's holographic. We're not trying to get people to throw bricks through windows. We are simply presenting information, design ideas, and projects that people can think about to make a better world under the obvious logical conclusion that the current order is not going to function. Now, I don't know how you work against that except creating propaganda, which has already started towards the movement. It's been done historically. But I believe that if we maintain a very rigid technical worldview, that there's no way you can attack this idea from traditional political routes. You can blackball it, you can call it names, you can try to create this air of illusion, you can do things like that, but the information holds strong. As this type of thinking moves forward, I think that it's going to attract the attention of many prominent people that see it not only for the broad view, but as just completely logical and obvious and rational and humane and sustainable. I spoke with somebody that was a CEO of an engineering company, and he affiliated with Siemens, and he told me that his idea was to create a solar, he was an engineer who was creating solar panels, was to make solar panels, put them in a rental system to force his organization, this is in short, to be required to maintain the highest standards of production to assure that they constantly work. What that means is that you're taking the liability of a good breaking down and bringing it back to the manufacturer. This is a very good, actually a very great sustainable transition step. So if something goes wrong with anything that we buy, we're not just out in the woods, and especially if our warranty is gone. Everything goes back because it's their responsibility. If you had a corporate mindset that had everything be their responsibility and they're going to be responsible for everything that happens to that good, you'd have a very different world. And that's kind of sort of the underpinning of how this type of new arrangement works out as an access society. Why would someone abuse goods in this society when they know that everyone else has to deal with the same thing? The beauty of this society, and I'm going to answer your other point in a second, is that it takes self-interest and it combines it with social interest in one unit. And it also combines with ecological interest, which I would say is almost tandem to social interest. So you're creating one mechanism. How many people would go in their home, go down into their building, in their apartment, and just start ripping out all the fuses? Just for fun. Why? Because they'd have their power out, right? Why would someone hack into a system like this and try to mess it up when they're just going to hurt themselves because everything that they get comes from this system? Why would you try to mess something? The whole idea of vandalism and this I call it a blowback because that's what it is. It's all this angst we have in society where people throw bricks through windows, where they, they do lots of things, is because they don't have a sense that it comes back to them, except for punishment, which doesn't even really work. So you hurt the society, you hurt yourself. Self-interest becomes social interest, and that's the powerful mechanism. Now, as far as your first question, what kind of things what kind of things do I see as a weakness in this system? I think the problem with this system is that you have to have different levels of relationships. There's no one relationship. In the price and market system, there's one relationship. Anyone can buy anything if they have the power. If you don't have the power, obviously, you're out of luck. If you don't have the purchasing power. But in this system, you can basically buy just about anything. If you want to do anything, if you have enough money, you can do it. And that's why the elite are what they are and why they love this system so much, or the 1%, as Occupy would say. In a resource-based economic model, there's no one system. The system of land management is another subject that I didn't talk upon. How do you create a system of shared land resources when clearly land is very finite? You have to create a value system orientation for that. You have to create, first of all, you have a society that has no labor centralization, right? So you don't have to worry about everyone being in one town, in a metropolitan center, because they all have to go to the same job every day, crowded into streets. All of that stuff is gone. The freedom of people to move around would be vast. Maybe, just maybe, people wouldn't want to have one homestead. Maybe they could move around all over the world and share different places to live. The whole world becomes your home. This type of mobility and travel and exploration, I think, would come natural, frankly. It already is. We don't do it because we don't have the money to do it. So you create a system of shared regions. You have regions that are designated for certain purposes. If you want to put on a concert, there's regions that have already been created that are conducive to that. And that comes through public consensus. That can be valued in different ways. If someone on this side of the planet, if someone in this side of the planet in the northern hemisphere wants to put in a stadium, someone in the southern hemisphere might have less value of input because they don't engage it. So you could have a system where people are regionally valued based on their contribution in the democratic process to figure out where things go. In a more technical context, if you look at the order of society, how do you arrange things to begin with? There's actually a logic to the way a city would unfold. So how do you decide what goes anywhere? Well, where's energy? Where's the highest conducive for energy? If a city is conducive, like Iceland, for geothermal, they have to be where the plate tectonic plates meet, and they have to be where the most shallow distances are. Boom. You have a logical distinction of where these plants go. You have centers of where people already exist. Boom. You have a logical calculation of where energy distribution needs to go. You have the facilities that I mentioned, the proximity strategy. You have a logical calculation of where all the distribution, recycling, and production facilities go. So it comes self-evident as you move forward. And there's certain variances that I think will emerge as well. So do I consider that really a problem? Not as much. But I consider it to be difficult to explain, because everyone's so used to the market system. So anyway, awfully long-winded today. Sorry.
Okay, we have another question from the internet. Yagi from Poland is asking a question about invigilation. Probably you've heard about Masdar City. There are going to be many detectors to control power, water usage, etc. The less power or water you use, the lower the bill you pay. It raises the question about privacy. The quote-unquote system knows everything about you. There's no place for anonymity. As far as I know, the RBE city will be going to have similar detectors to control demand and supply. So how do you see the privacy in an RBE?
I don't know where that idea came from. I mean, if you have a system that's technically oriented to manage resources, and you don't have to track them, it's not like someone gets a computer and there's a chip in it and someone has to know where it is at all times. Why would you need that? I mean, there's no incentive for people to do a lot of things that they do in the current system as far as abuse. This isn't a loss of privacy-based system. There's no reason for that. There's no reason to have cameras in every corner. Now, I will say there is a merit of tracking things statistically. That's not necessarily privacy issues. I know a study that was done, an experiment in inner city circumstances where people were paid, of course, because they're broke, to wear different sensors on their bodies to provide feedback of their environment. That's actually a very powerful concept. Imagine if each one of us was relaying feedback of our environment in a certain way to a localized mainframe that could engage certain threats. So, for example, it could sense smoke from a fire that maybe hasn't been seen yet. There's a lot of things to be said about the benefits of having an engaged, interactive society. But tracking as far as privacy, as far as privacy violation, I think it's been highly exaggerated in the world today. In the world today, privacy is very needed because everyone's corrupt. There, I said it. People are so obsessed with privacy because they're doing bad things all the time. Everyone is. Now, I mean, you could talk about privacy and other means, which are clearly viable. No one wants to be stared in when they're sleeping and things like that. That's a whole different level. And no one wants to be tracked for the sake of advertising, which is what is happening right now across the world, where people can manipulate. The real danger in a competitive market environment is because there's a higher echelon of people. If they're tracking your every move, that means they know what you're doing. That means they have control over you if you ever get in trouble or in the way. That is the antithesis. That is the problem. And that's exactly what this system removes, in part.
Okay. Will the idea of having a government or something of the kind in this kind of resource-based economic system will be removed?
Government becomes a series of sensors and a series of monitors. The people that really engage industry and monitor what's happening is the government. There's only a few exceptions when it comes to, say, as I had mentioned, how you think about institutions to protect people in the whole of society. Clearly, if you have an institution for mental health, someone has to be at some level to engage that. And you wouldn't call that government. They're participating in a particular layer that relates to the whole of society. Government is a system of regulation. What defines government is regulation, which of course the market has to have. In this system, the regulation is technical. And the regulation is defined by the incentive and sustainability, the sustainability and efficiency protocols at the very core. So in that, you have a natural process that weeds out things when it comes to production, and you don't need anything regarding basic security because there's no incentive to move forward in that way. Regulation and government control is as minuscule as possible. I'm not saying it disappears. I would never say that because there might be some kind of larger order organization, say, that deals with resource management, or say massive civil threats, or I should say massive natural threats. I mean, we just had an enormous strike in the Philippines that's killed 10,000 people. In order to deal with something like that, you need an international organization that's ready to move and to help people. So they have to be ready. If you want to call that government, you can. I don't necessarily say it would be. I'd say it's still localized. I'd say it's if you look at a whole sensor system for Earth, there's going to be people that have to monitor it. It goes straight into the system. There's always going to be small problems that happen. They're not managing people, though. They're managing the process. So I can't drill it in enough. It's a process management system. What's in charge is the system itself, not people. That's it?
That's it.
Whew, goodness, I'm out of wind. And I really want to thank the Berlin team, and of course, thank you all for coming from where you have. I really, really appreciate it, seriously. And I also want to thank the Berlin team and Frankie for all the great work, because I know it's a pain to put this stuff on. So thank you all so much.